For having me. I'm really honored to be here, actually. And as Michael just said, I actually used to use Conversion XL way in the days before I was at Facebook Inc., when I was at doing my own startup, just struggling to try to figure out what moved the needle, how to optimize things. And so super happy to give back, be able to share some of the things we've learned at Instagram, and help you all to build better companies that are more focused on kind of user problems and how to solve them effectively. Whoa, what just happened here? So my name is Bangaly Kaba. I'm the head of growth at Instagram. The growth org at Instagram is relatively young. We're about 4 years old. We're the younger brother of Facebook growth. And Facebook really created the first consumer-facing growth product org. So we are a full-scale product org, engineers, data scientists, growth marketers, content strategists, embedded researchers. I think we're an organization of about 120 or so people right now. So we're on a fast path to 1 billion users. Here are our public-facing information at the moment. We have well over 800 million monthly active accounts, 500 million daily actives. And most of our growth actually happens outside of the US. The company's still relatively young, right? So founded in 2010 and acquired at Facebook in 2012, was it? When there was only 13 employees. So we still have a very small culture. I think the entire company overall is still only about 500 people. Very small, very intimate. When we sit in a room with the other product managers, we can literally fit in a room and talk about things. Instagram, as most of you know, is kind of the product. I've seen it grow, and we've seen it grow over the years into something that's really been special. We started off with a product that was really feed stories and posts, whether it's by the Golden State Warriors.
He gets around Stevie Adams and sets up space.
And over time, we've evolved, and now we include things like stories. And stories was a really interesting kind of product conception where we saw that people were posting in feed increasingly less because they felt like the bar for posting was too high. They had to put things that were perfect. So now we have stories, and stories lives in this stories tray at the top on the left, and it's really about the everyday moment and capturing that. But as we've done that, we've also learned a lot of things along the way, because none of this really matters if we don't get the right people onto the platform, if we don't really put ourselves in the shoes of users all around the world and really understand what the challenges are. So today I'm going to walk you through 6 kind of key areas of learnings that we've had over the years. These are things that I want you all to take away, and hopefully they can add to your organizations. So the first is focus on the marginal user. When we talk about the marginal user, what we're talking about is not your power user, not you and your buddies who are hanging out at a beer garden thinking about, hey, what would be cool? When we talk about the marginal user at Instagram, we're talking about the woman in northern Jakarta who's on a 2G phone, it's an Android phone, and she's paying by the megabit. And the reason why that matters is because every click is expensive for that person. And when you think about beautiful design, it has to scale to all phones. It can't just be for your iPhone 10, which has the highest resolution. And so when we think about growth, really what we're thinking about, it's not hacks, it's not a playbook of 15 tips and tricks. It's really about removing barriers to adoption, which enable people to use the product. Removing barriers to adoption that enable people to use the product. And so what we try to do is we try to live and breathe this experience of the new and the resurrected users, because those are the people who are the marginal users. These are the people who have fresh eyes. They don't really understand what's going on. They don't know why and how to use the product. So instead of our teams actually going and using the product as an everyday user and posting stories and doing things that power users do, we are also ruthlessly focused on dogfooding new states, null states, onboarding flows of all features across the apps and different types of connectivity states on different types of phones. That dogfooding helps us to understand what's happening with our product. How many of you all in your room have signed up for your own product and dogfooded it as a new user in the last week? No hands. That's a problem. If you're not doing that every day, you're not seeing the challenges that people who are coming to your products are using. You don't actually understand the friction that they have. And so if you really want to remove barriers to adoption, you need to live and breathe that experience yourself. Another thing is we actually have embedded researchers, which is certainly very much a plus for us. But the embedded researchers, in doing research, whether it's, as Tara said, actually talking to your customers, whether they're here or whether they're out of country, but you understand what the norms are, you understand how the language and design actually work for your product. And you start seeing challenges that are specific to people, but you also see challenges that are specific to the environment. So some of the things we saw, an example is when I worked on the Facebook growth team for 2 years before I moved over to Instagram, and we really were struggling to grow in India at the time. And so we traveled to India 3 times in 15 months. And one of the things we saw, for example, that you couldn't have known until you went there is that there was just such a high density of population on low bandwidth networks that it was really hard to use your device. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. San Francisco has 8,000 people per square mile. In Mumbai, there are 59,000 people per square mile. Imagine, it's like going to a Jay-Z concert or a Nickelback concert or whatever the concert is, and you're trying to use your phone, right? It just never works. And if that is the state of you using your product on an everyday basis, then we need to figure out what that barrier adoption is and how do we remove it. And that's why Facebook Lite was born. It was born expressly out of those trips and understanding that experience. So for you all, understanding the real people challenges. One of the things, if you have a product that's international, that's really important to understand, is that there's a very different paradigm for using a product. A lot of us have been brought up using products on desktop, and there's very specific conventions to using a desktop. How you think about search, how you navigate around. Whereas many people, especially in markets outside the US, are mobile first and mobile only. And a lot of the paradigms actually are WhatsApp driven, because WhatsApp is life in terms of communication. And so if you think from that lens, you think about how that changes the way you think about the way a product should function, it's very, very different. And so, so the second learning is that impact requires what we call understand work. Let's talk about understand work. So the way that we work, and this is something I learned when I was at Facebook Growth, and we brought it over to Instagram Growth, is there's 3 phases of work. There's understand work, there's identifying work, and there's executing work. In every planning cycle that we have, and everything that we do, we are actually committing to doing work in each one of these phases. Right now, we are in the middle of Q2 planning, and all of my teams expressly have on their roadmap understand work. This is engineering understand work, this is data understand work, is design understand work. And what we mean by understand work is it's time that's dedicated to figuring out what are the questions that we have, how do we get real signal on them so we know what to work on, not just to go and do any kind of work, so that by the next planning cycle, that understand work has given a signal on the right things to work on, and they feed into the next cycle of planning. And so you'll see some examples here. Understand work is like, what are the real user problems? That might be a quick research sprint. Right? It might be actually pulling data and doing analysis or cuts. It might be actually adding logging to something so that we actually understand what's going on when we don't have it. Identifying, saying, okay, now that we understand what we think the data is telling us or what we think the user story is, what is the actual right way to go about doing it? Sometimes we can do this in a short period of time. Sometimes it takes us longer. And then executing, the thing that we always talk about in terms of execution is perfect execution matters. Because if you do not have perfect execution, what you end up having is an unclear understanding of whether it was the wrong strategy or poor execution. So if you go down one path and you believe that this is the right strategy, but you have sloppy execution, you will never know whether it was the execution or the strategy. So perfect execution every time is exactly what we're talking about. And perfect execution means making sure we have the right product requirements, making sure we're exposing the right types of people in the test, and making sure that we're analyzing things in the right way. And that's something that we demand of our teams all the time, because it's the only way to know if you're doing the right things. And yes, it doesn't work all the time, but if you don't hold a very, very high bar, you're never going to be able to get to that place. And so the difference, and this is something I talk about, and my teams laugh at me when we talk about this, is identify, justify, execute. That is oh, you know what would be cool to do? It would be cool to do this. And then you go and you find data to support it, and then you build that thing. And you build that thing, and it launches, and you see no movement in your metrics, and you go out to dinner and celebrate. That is something we refuse to do, right? Think about this paradigm, because it happens a lot. It happens a lot. Sometimes it even happens in Instagram, not in the growth team, but in other parts. You see something you think would be cool? No. You see something you think would be cool, you justify it with data, and you go and execute on it. And so our paradigm here is you understand first, you have to work from first principles. Understand what's going on, see what the data tells you, validate it through research, or use the research to validate it through data, and then figure out what's happening. The third learning here is track your ecosystem health daily. So, oh man, am I stepping on something here, or is this just? As Tyler just pointed out, everything starts with retention. Retention is everything, and so we have these J curves, we call them, because they're kind of like a J like this. And what you're looking for, each one of these lines is a cohort, and you're looking for that flattening out. Also, you need to understand growth accounting. So growth accounting, if this is a concept that's new to you, is basically understanding your net growth is basically a mathematical formula. Net growth is equal to the new people you have every day, plus the people who are resurrected, minus the people who churn. It's that simple. And so if you look at the top here, churn is orange. It's pretty high, but our new and resurrected are also kind of halfway there. And so the blue line is the kind of the sum of those, and you can see it's fairly rigorous. And so what we do is we look at this every day, we understand the seasonality and the cyclicality of it, and what you should do is you should be able to track exactly when things launch and how they affect what's happening, when things break, et cetera, et cetera. Having this rigor and building this muscle around your product ecosystem is incredibly important. Everyone from our CEO who might ping me in the middle of a work day and say, hey, what's going on with net growth today, to kind of our IC engineers are looking at growth accounting for not only the overall product, but we'll look at growth accounting for Instagram stories. We'll look at growth accounting for Instagram Direct. On a feature level, you can have growth accounting, as well as on an overall product level. Lastly, when we talk about measurement, it's really important and really stress working super hard to define the right product metrics for your team. And your team's success is only good insofar as you have the right objective function. And so having the right objective function means everyone rallies around the same goals, they prioritize the right things, they think about everything in the same way, and you're not choosing vanity metrics, but you're choosing metrics that actually correlate to the user and what's happening. And part of the way you do this is you look at one part correlational. So hey, what are the things that move Instagram stories? Or what are the things that move registration on Instagram? And then to the extent that you can, we also run things called holdouts. So you basically take the feature away, and you see if it actually has impact on what's going on. Right? It's the only pure way to know if there is causal relationship between thing A and outcome B. The fourth learning here is iterate to the vision. You should have a vision. When you think about growing your product, don't think about what's just the next thing, but think further out. What is the end state that you want to have? Where do you want to get to? And it's really easy, as per the video we saw earlier this morning, to get addicted to metrics. You should be, right? You should be able to get to that place. But sometimes you need to pause and zoom out, and you need to look at the big picture and say, are we actually having diminishing returns from the effort that we're getting per the impact? And what is the real user problem, and how do we get there? And so this was a funny story, because we have an amazing design team, incredible design team. I love working with them. And we started, when I started Instagram about 2 years ago, this was our registration flow. It was beautiful. These pictures don't even do it justice, because what the experience really was, it was actually on each one of these screens, there was a gradient that was moving in the background. So it started off red, and if you left it there for like 10 seconds, it could be blue and then be purple, which the designers loved and the community loved, except from a growth perspective, we absolutely hated it. We hated it because if you can see and you look at the details here, the buttons, for example, are really hard to see that they're buttons. And on older Android phones, because in most countries outside of the US, the phones and the component parts are a lot older and smaller, you wouldn't have a lot of clarity of what you're seeing, so smaller screens, worse resolution. The way that some of these icons were laid out, it actually pushed things below the fold so people didn't see it. The conversion on this flow was absolutely terrible. It was atrocious. And we knew that we had to go and fix it. So we started working on it piece by piece, but we had a vision that we wanted to get to along the way. And the vision ended up looking like this. Super clean. It reflected the new modernity of what we called Whiteout. And I don't know if you remember this, about a year and a half ago, we whited out the entire interface of Instagram. And we still had the old registration flow at the time. So this is where we wanted to get to. The question is, how do you get there? And so this was a big battle and a big argument between product and design. What's the right path? How do we think about this thing? And design really insisted. They said, hey, look, we can do this in one fell swoop because it's moving design forward. It's really not that many changes. And it should be super simple. And so this is what we learned. The redesign test did not work. And this is a quote from one of my designers, Anna, who's fantastic. She said, what's worse, we weren't able to identify which of our multiple changes caused our metrics to drop. And it was because we had so many components and so many things going on, even if they were minor, whether it was filled-in buttons or the text color, the status bar, all of the things. So here's some of the learnings that Anna gave me. I asked Anna, I said, hey, I'm going to speak in Austin. Tell me what you learned from this experience. And this is what she told me. One of the things I think is super important to call out here is avoid bundling multiple design changes into one test, even if they seem minimal and a step forward for design quality. Quickly roll back ineffective solutions and strive to learn from clean data. Right, so this is one of the things where we learned as a company, we learned as a design team and a product team how to think about this. And this is something that we will never make this mistake again. Hopefully you all won't. And it's a lot better to have the vision and figure out how to componentize it and iterate there than to just try to go full bore. Fifth learning here is zoom out and solve the larger problem. So this is kind of in line with the notion of you can really get deep in the weeds of the micro optimizations and try to find, hey, there's a win here that's going to give me $5,000 more incremental revenue. And optimization there that might get me $12,000. But sometimes you can zoom out. And if you look at the bigger picture and everything that's happening, you might actually be able to find that one thing that's going to move the needle by $2 million. And so for us, that was really trying to understand how to improve this thing we called access churn. Access churn is when people go to your app, they actively try to log in, they are unsuccessful, and then they never come back again. This happened when Instagram looked like this. This happened on an order of magnitude of 75,000 people per day. Do the math on that. That's 27 million people a year we were losing only because they couldn't figure out how to log back into their account. It was a terrible situation. And I can't show you the numbers here, but when we actually started looking at the decision tree and the funnels of where to go, you start seeing a really interesting breakdown of going from 75,000 a day to 40,000 of this and 30,000 of that and 5,000 here, 10,000 there, up to like single digits. And so the question was, what do we do? And what we had to do is instead of saying, okay, we're going to fix this branch that has 8,000 people who are falling off and fix this branch at 10,000. What we did is we actually bubbled all the way back to the top and said, how do we fix this screen? Because this screen is where the root of all the problems are. And you look at this screen, it's really hard to even see. So you have at the top, there's your username, password. There's a really hard to see button that becomes active when you put things in. There's a text link that's not underlined. It says forget your login details or login as and your Facebook credentials. The thing that actually killed me the most about this screen was actually this bottom part, login as. If you had Facebook and you had signed up for Instagram with Facebook, it would actually show you that you could just log in and all you had to do was tap that thing. And I think there was an order of like 40,000 people a day who just weren't even tapping that button. So we're like, how do we fix this, right? Like, don't go down in the weeds. Let's bubble up and fix the right thing here. And so we looked at the current app experience, and then we looked at the web experience. I don't know if you've looked at Instagram.com at all, but we're building out like a very awesome web experience. And what we realized is our web experience is actually way better than our app experience for solving this problem. And on web, what we had is if you were logged out, we only showed you, hey, look, is this you? Sign in right now. No other options as clear or you can just switch accounts. So we decided to go and build that thing, but the way we decided to build that thing was by doing it specifically for Facebook users, connected users, people who logged in with Instagram using Facebook or signed up with Instagram using Facebook, and then create a similar experience for people who are not Facebook connected, where they can opt into this. But in our execution phase of this, it didn't work out the way that we planned, which was okay. And the reason why it didn't work out the way that we planned was because in order for us to build this Facebook connected experience that was very clear, it would have increased our cold start times from like 6 seconds to like 30 seconds. So we had to figure out, well, what else are we going to do here? And so what we decided was just to build this one-tap experience for everyone where they opt in. And so what we built was an opt-in where you upsell at logout. Hey, hey, John, do you want to, us to save your Instagram account and credentials? We don't actually save your password. We just say something like, we just save something on the device that says you've logged in successfully. And then what we'll do is when you log out, you see this one-tap login screen. And so when we did this, and this is to the left, some of our proprietary measurement tools, you can see our MAP was through the roof. Within 6 months of launching this, we had saved or added effectively 17 million monthly active people just from doing this, and that was our first iteration. So we had a 73% opt-in rate for Android and 85% opt-in rate for iOS, and this was just an incredible win, and we had so many more iterations to go on this, right? So zoom out, solve the larger problem when you can. And then lastly, focus on impact. Right, going back to the whole paradigm of understand, identify, execute instead of identify, justify, execute, launching is not your goal, impact is the goal. Right? So launching things and it's not impactful doesn't mean that you have failed, but it means you need to keep iterating until you find impact. Right? And that's what you should be striving for. So these are a short list of growth pro tips. This is stuff that we usually only talk about internally, but I'm sharing with you all. This is stuff that actually comes from Facebook growth. And so these are some of the 5 or 6 things that we talk about all the time, about living and breathing impact, focusing on the things that are important, not urgent. There's always a fire, but if you don't focus on the important things, you never really make strategic progress. Having good process in everything that you do in terms of how you execute with your teams, how you communicate, and then building projects around problems and goals, not solutions. Okay. So that's all I have. I want to thank my team. I have an amazing, amazing team of people who support me, and also my assistant, Sam, who's in the back, who makes my life run. I don't know what I would do without her. And so thank you all for being here. I hope this has been helpful.